The following half-hour show is a paid political program and is not endorsed by this station, management, or staff.
The following program is sponsored by Excalibur Insurance Management Services.
It is truly our pleasure to bring you the award-winning Washington journalist, Jonathan Salant. He has been based in Washington, D.C. for 36 years and has been covering Washington politics back to the Reagan presidency of the 1980s. It is probably a disservice to simply say he covered politics when the more appropriate description is that he was at the center of action. He is currently the assistant managing editor for politics for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, which would normally be impressive unless you consider everything else he's done. He is the former president of the esteemed and venerable National Press Club, an organization most famous for hosting the President of the United States at its annual dinner in Washington. All presidents, all the way back to President-elect Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1932, attended the National Press Club dinner. He is also a member of the Society of Professional Journalists and is a member of the Washington, D.C. Journalism Hall of Fame. Among his many awards, he is the winner of the Dirksen Award for Distinguished Reporting of Congress, the Walzak Award for Political Analysis, and 2 New York Press Club awards. He was also a finalist for the Raymond Clapper Award for Washington Reporting and the Robin Toner Prize for Excellence in Political Reporting. His reporting has been featured on ABC National News, The Washington Post, Bloomberg News, Bloomberg Business Week, and the Associated Press. He has been the Washington correspondent for the Star-Ledger, as well as the Syracuse Herald-Journal and the Post-Standard. His education includes a Bachelor of Science from the State University of New York at Stony Brook, as well as a Master of Arts and a degree in journalism from the distinguished Ivy League Columbia University School of Journalism. He lives in Rockville, Maryland, a suburb of Washington, with his wife Bonnie. We are interviewing him today fresh from a presidential press conference he is covering, and we will discuss the Israeli conflict with Hamas, its impact on the Middle East, and what it may mean for the United States, as well as the Republican food fight over the speakership, as well as a look ahead to the 2024 elections and their importance to the country. We are very pleased to bring him to you today.
This is the Volpe Report, a weekly news and political interview show examining the latest local, state, and national issues with Chuck Volpe. Insightful, informative, controversial. The area's premier political talk show, the Volpe Report.
Jonathan, welcome to the Volpe Report.
Glad to be here.
You just came from, and ironically, a press briefing that involves Pennsylvania, specifically southwestern Pennsylvania, and something that impacts energy. That's a subject, just you wouldn't know this, but I'm going to inform you. I've covered our Governor Josh Shapiro on shows about RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, and some of what's going on relative to Pennsylvania energy production. So that would obviously, what you just covered would touch on that. So can you talk to our audience what you just left in a briefing?
Yeah, southwestern Pennsylvania, along with Ohio and West Virginia, are going to be part of a hydrogen hub, one of 7 in the country. It's about $7 billion in federal grants from the Department of Energy. And the idea is to use it to produce 50 million metric tons of clean hydrogen fuel by 2020, thus reducing emissions and reducing the need for carbon fuels.
Wow, pretty important stuff. And who conducted the briefing?
It was a background from White House officials.
Oh, from the White House.
Who were talking. But the president, I know you're going to see this on Sunday. The president on Friday is supposed to be in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, make the announcement.
Wow, that's pretty neat. So that makes it very timely. I guess I got a little bit of a scoop on what everybody else. Of course, this show will air on Sunday, so then the rest of our audience will know about it from you directly. Can you give us any anecdotes going back to Reagan and all the presidents you covered, if we could take them in order, starting with President Reagan, little things from your coverage that you noticed, and then we'll, of course, go to Clinton and right on through. I'm sure the little anecdotes in covering all that you've covered in Washington politics, president of the National Press Club, you would have access to information most of us don't. So could you kind of go through starting with Reagan?
Well, most of my time in D.C., about half my time in D.C., was spent as a regional reporter like now, where you're covering the White House and the federal agencies as they affect a local government or a state, local area. I originally came to Washington as a reporter for the Syracuse newspapers. So when I drove from Washington to Syracuse, which I did every so often, always went through on I-81 through Scranton to actually know the exits and everything. My favorite story in those years was under President George Herbert Walker Bush.
The first Bush, yes, after Reagan,
Yes.
right?
Syracuse University had just won the lacrosse championship, the National Lacrosse Championship. And the president invited them and Hobart College from upstate New York, which is Division III, and two other schools that had won lacrosse titles to the White House to go on the front lawn, go on the White House lawn and pose for pictures. And he does the first one, and he does the second one, and then he's in front of the Syracuse University team, and he's posing for the picture. The White House photographer takes the picture, and then one of the guys from the lacrosse team reaches into his pocket, takes out one of those little Instamatic cameras,
right,
hands it to his friend, puts his arm around the president, and they all took turns doing that. Thing about George W. Bush is that, in fact, the year I was press club president, we went to the White House and gave him an honorary press badge, a membership card from the press club, and I also gave him one of my campaign buttons. I'm a big campaign button collector. I have thousands of them, and when I ran for president, I printed up my own buttons. So I gave him one of the buttons, and then a couple of months later at a dinner, you're allowed to go up to the president, and my son, who at the time was 9 years old, asked me if I could get the president's autograph for him.
Wow.
So I went up to the President Bush, who's met me just once in his life. How's the press club doing? He had a brain to remember all these people, which
wow,
I think made him so successful as a politician.
Any thoughts about the Barack Obama presidency? Anything that stand out? Any little anecdotes or that?
Well, I got to meet the president. I don't get to meet that many presidents. I got to go to the White House Christmas party, which I don't usually get because they're not a regular at the White House. But they did invite me. Right. That was fun to be with my wife, and we posed with the president, and that was nice. And I'd met the president when he was not president; he was a senator. The year I was press club president, they did a program on the 4 with George Clooney, and so I remembered that President Obama, that I had met him there. And George Clooney I talked to him, and he played that Good Night Tomorrow, the Edward R. Murrow
wonderful show,
coffee play. Well, the head of CBS News was Fred Friendly,
right,
who I took a class with when I was at Columbia Journalism School.
Wow.
So I could tell George Clooney, I know Fred Friendly.
Well, see, you've touched history. That was my point.
And then President Trump, the one thing about President Trump is I've always felt, you treat everybody fairly. You leave them the facts. And when I got laid off, before I took the Pittsburgh job, I got notes of condolences. Maybe that's too strong a word, but notes from the regional press secretary for President Biden,
right,
and the regional press secretary for President Trump.
Wow. Yeah, just great stuff, Jonathan.
And I'll give you my Biden story. I'll give you my one Biden
Please.
story. 2006 again. He's the senator, powerful and well-known senator, and I'm hosting him at the luncheon. And I do the introduction, and I say something like, if the Democrats win back the Senate, this is 2006, President Biden, Joe Biden at that time, will be the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. But it's a job he really doesn't want. Everybody laughs. I say, how do we know? He's running for president, and we'd rather do that. Yeah. And we know he's running for president because he's spending the summer in Iowa. And if he was just going to study agriculture, he'd go to all the farm stands on the road to the eastern shore of Delaware, where the beaches are.
Exactly right.
So he goes to me afterwards and says, "You're good, dangerous, but good."
Well, to be called dangerous as a reporter probably is the greatest compliment you could get. Jonathan, let's now delve into some of the serious business our country is involved in currently. It's a timely interview in a sense. And I guess, I want to save the biggest subject for last, and that is the dastardly terrorist attack by the Hamas into Israel that has riveted the nation. Your experience, which was staggering even for me, when you tell the story about your family connection and your father to Jerusalem, makes you not only an expert based on your resume and career as a professional journalist, but you have actually personal stories to tell about that. So we'll save that for later, for now. But let's talk about, I've likened it, if you ever saw the movie Animal House, you remember the food fight in Animal House? Well, the Republicans are engaged in one again. And I have to tell you that it's an amazing thing for me. Like after they put this Carnival Act on in January, where it took 15 ballots to get to a speaker, and then they depose him, which has never happened in history, of course. And now they're engaged apparently in closed-door conferences. Pick it up wherever you want on what your take. You've won awards for your coverage of the United States Congress. Please speak.
Well, you have a group of people in the Republican conference that don't want government to function. They don't care if you shut it down. They want certain things, and they're going to fight, demand that it happens. The problem is then split government. Remember, it's a Democratic president and a Democratic Senate. You have to compromise. And if you don't compromise, the government shuts down. Well, these people I don't care if the government shuts down, so they'll spend less money. The deficit will be lowered because we don't have to spend any money. And there's enough of them that you can't put together a conference or majority of the Republican, you need 218 votes, 217 vote vacancies. You can't put together 217 Republicans to elect the speaker because only 221, 222, and you have 4, 5, 6 who won't go that way. So you don't have the votes to elect it. Now you could reach out to the Democrats, which doesn't happen in this country. We have a presidential form of government, a parliamentary form of government. Israel's one of those. You get the party with the most votes gets to pick, or gets to be the prime minister, and has to, if they can get enough other parties to join with them. And you promise them cabinet posts, you promise them legislation, promise a lot of stuff to band together. Here we don't have, we have two parties. Now, there are some Democrats, especially moderates, who would have been willing to work with the Republicans. In fact, if Kevin McCarthy had asked them for help. But McCarthy didn't want to ask them for help. He wanted to do it all on Republicans by himself. And on Friday, he put together a bill to a continuing resolution to keep the government open, which had all the right-wing wish lists on it, 30% cut, including 30% cut in aid to Israel. Wow. And it didn't pass because there was enough Republicans that didn't want to do that. They don't like the idea of passing like an omnibus spending bill. They want to go through each individual agency, which they have a right to do and used to happen, and vote on each spending instead of being told, take it or leave it. The next day, McCarthy put a bill that basically funded the government at current spending limits, except for Ukraine, took the money out of Ukraine and said, take it or leave it. The Democrats hemmed and hawed and took it. And enough Republicans took it. More Democrats voted yes than Republicans, but they passed that. And then McCarthy went on TV on Sunday and said, the Democrats tried to shut down the government, but we prevented that from happening. Democrats meet Monday at their caucus behind closed door, and that's all they're talking about. They're showing the video. Right. The Democrats say, I'm not going to help Kevin McCarthy if that's what he's going to say.
Right.
I don't need him.
Right.
And they all voted no unanimously.
Right.
And therefore, he didn't have the votes on the Republican side to stay in, and all the Democrats voted no. And there were enough moderates who probably would have voted to save McCarthy if he had asked for help or had made a concession.
How does this end up? I mean, right now, at a time when our country needs to be functioning, at a time when free people in the state of Israel are probably going to need our help, our government shut down. They can't help anybody or do anything for anybody. So how does this get solved, do you think?
Well, there's two ways it gets solved. First, one side caves, but they still hold the speakers that right to vacate the chair, as it's known as, and call for a vote anytime they want and force the speaker to go to the right and be very conservative. Or the speaker moves toward the middle and tracks enough Democratic votes. They needed that to keep the government open. They needed that to prevent the fall. And whether or not you want to do that, that's divided government, you have to do that. Right. Or the third thing is that the moderates of both parties, and the moderates in the Republican Party are led by Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania, right, come up with a compromise candidate. There was talk originally, because Kevin McCarthy was going to struggle to get the votes, that Fitzpatrick would have been a choice of 20 Republicans and 20 Democrats. And then basically, the 20 Republicans say to McCarthy, you can't win. We're not going to support you. And the 20 Democrats go to the Democratic caucus and say, well, you have the choice. You can try to get Republicans get an ideological right-winger as speaker, or you have a moderate who's willing to work with you. What are you going to do? And that they would always pick the second choice, especially when they're in a minority and they're lucky to get anything in the House. Remember, the House is a majority-ruled institution, and unless you compromise, unless the majority party is willing to reach across the aisle, they don't have to do that. Exactly. The Senate, they have to. In the House, they don't.
Right. Like, for example, the House doesn't have the filibuster rule.
Right.
So they can do, they can operate with the slimmest of majorities. And as the Republicans are showing, with the slimmest of majorities, literally 5 seats or whatever it is, they're able to conduct a lot of the things the Republican base wanted. Certain investigations of President Bush, the Hunter Biden issue, some of the other things that was on their agenda to look into and investigate. They're actually doing these things because they have the slimmest of majorities. So,
well,
go ahead.
The speaker basically can do it, or the committee chairs have the power. They don't need a vote. But the reason that the speaker announced an investigation of President Biden was because if they wanted to vote on it, like they did for Clinton, like they did for Nixon, like they did for Trump after Nancy Pelosi announced the investigation, he wasn't going to have the votes of too many Republicans from Biden districts, moderates, who weren't going to vote to authorize an impeachment investigation at this point. Nancy Pelosi had the same 5-seat majority, but she was able to get stuff done because the Democrats want government to work. Right. And she has her own far left Democrat, whole radical fringe.
The squad, they're known. Sure.
Right. But if push comes to shove, they would rather get something than nothing. So they push for stuff. But a lot of these conservative Republicans, they don't want anything. They want to vote. They don't want the government to function. They don't believe that government's a force for good. Remember President Reagan, the scariest words in the American language or English language: I'm here from the government to help you. I'm from the government. I'm here to help you. Well, the far right Republicans believe that. They want to slash government. They want to cut regulation, and they have the power to at least force the Republicans either go in that direction or reach out to Democrats. If they won't reach out to Democrats, they're stuck.
I ran for governor of Pennsylvania as a Democrat back 30 or so years ago when I was a kid. But I'm now a Republican because I felt the excesses of the far left, the squad, things that I could not abide. They're anti-Israel, they're pro-Palestine, they're to me anarchists, very much the left equivalent of the knuckleheads in the far right. Well, I'm finding now as a Republican, I can't escape it because now I'm looking at the far right lunatics, not the squad, but some members of the Freedom Caucus and the like, and I don't understand how you can be in government or politics at that level, at a national level, and not understanding compromise. Our framers and founders of this great country and the Federalist Papers and the like, the Madisons and the Alexander Hamiltons and the Thomas Jeffersons, they had intended a competitive form of government because they said the natural ambition of human beings would keep was the best check and balance. But at some point, having to understand that the goal is for the country to move forward, I can't even comprehend, my friends have heard me say this simple phrase my whole life: 50% of something is better than 100% of nothing. Because the last time I checked, 100 times 0 was 0. So at any rate, your insight and perspective is tremendous. And if you don't mind, we'll take a break for a few moments. We'll run our commercial, and then we'll be back after these messages. So just hang in there, Jonathan. Thank you. When we come back, I do want to talk now and turn to the most, believe it or not, it would take something of an extraordinary international nature to put the food fight in the Republican House on page 10, but the terrorist dastardly attack I've likened to Pearl Harbor that Hamas did to Israel clearly fits that description, and I want to talk to you about that as soon as we come back.
Now there's more places you can see the Volpe Report. Watch every Sunday morning at 10:30 a.m. on Fox 56. Listen on WILK Radio Sundays at 11:30 a.m. or watch on YouTube at The Volpe Report. More ways to watch. Still the same premier public affairs show dedicated to the topics that matter most to Pennsylvanians.
Jonathan, welcome back. As we presaged, as I presaged earlier, that we would talk about this, and I wanted to spend some time on it. Your expertise, obviously, is just from your career and your resume, and your experience establishes that. But you even have more personal experience with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that in its, I guess, most recent iteration, which was the dastardly terrorist attack by Hamas just a couple days ago into Israel, killing civilians, women and children and the like, unexpected. That's the subject we need to talk about now, and your insight, I think, will be profound. So let's talk about, first of all, could you kind of set the stage, because your insight into this will be much more than people can just read about or learn quickly. You know, what led up to this? And I'll already give you the follow-up question. You know, obviously there's been criticism of Israeli intelligence that this could happen without them having any clue about it. So kind of just expound, and the mic is yours, on what you think caused this and led up to it, and what failure in Israel's defense and intelligence allowed for it. Take it from there.
Well, let's go back to 1948, when the British Mandated Palestine was divided into a Jewish section and an Arab section. They split up the land, and the Arab armies attacked Israel, lost, and Israel got to have more land than they had before. And they all but the original Palestine Mandate, all but the Gaza Strip, which Egypt took over and captured, and the West Bank, which Jordan took over. And from 1948 to 1967, nobody created, in those two Arab controls, a Palestinian state. They were under Arab control, but they didn't create the Palestinian state. We have 1967 war.
6-day war.
And Israel, and Israel captures the Gaza and the West Bank. And they offer to give it back for peace, as they did after the 1973 Yom Kippur War. They gave back the Sinai Peninsula. They gave back for peace with Egypt, which is still standing on. They still couldn't get peace with the Palestinians. In 1993, they had an agreement, Camp David Accords, and I was at the White House when Arafat and Rabin shook hands on that. And then I think President Clinton, at the end of his time in office, Jimmy Carter got the original deal with Egypt and then won the Nobel Peace Prize. But then again, the head of Egypt was assassinated.
Anwar Sadat.
And then Rabin makes a deal. He's assassinated. And Clinton, at the end of 2000 tried to have another deal to really get it done. And they had a serious negotiation, they couldn't get a final peace. In 2000, meanwhile, what happens is that in the 2006, Israel realizes, even the far right, that they can't continue to be a Jewish democratic state and rule over millions of Palestinians. Either they're Jewish with a Jewish and they give the Palestinians no rights, or they're democratic and they're going to be outnumbered because of the Palestinian birth rate. So they withdraw from the Gaza Strip, which again, was the place they captured in 1967. They withdraw all the troops, all the settlers, everything out of the Gaza Strip. They hold elections in Gaza, and they elect Hamas. Hamas gets a majority of the Palestinian legislature. Hamas's charter says Jews created World War I, Jews created World War II, Jews own the media, Jews own the bank. And I'll read now, because I have it on my screen, from the charter says, the day of judgment will not come about until Muslims fight Jews and kill them. Then the Jews will hide behind rocks and trees, and the rocks and trees will cry out, "O Muslim, there is a Jew hiding behind me. Come and kill him." That's from the Hamas charter. That's when Israel put now that they're out of Gaza, but Hamas was elected power, put the cordon around Gaza and basically built a wall and kept them from, and basically pinned them in. Right. Meanwhile, nothing's happening on the front. The conservative right-wing in Israel running the government most of the time, and they don't want a Palestinian state at all. They're opposed to, even under pressure, Netanyahu, Benjamin Netanyahu, now still the current prime minister, agreed to the two-state solution, which would be a Jewish state and a Palestinian state in the land. Like 2 states for 2 peoples, which is still the policy of the U.S. government, which one of the pro-Israel groups, J Street, that's what they're campaigning on. And meanwhile, nothing's happened. Palestine, you had the 2 intifadas. Right. It still didn't win them a Palestinian state. Right. Now you have a new government come in. With President Trump, he moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Right. And the reason the embassies were not in Jerusalem is East Jerusalem, and the Holy City, was captured in the 6-Day War. And most countries, including the U.S., not recognize that part of Jerusalem as part of the city. You're not supposed to be able to understand international law says you're not supposed to annex captured territory. That violates international law. To this day, most of the nations do not recognize Chechnya as part of Russia. It was captured from Ukraine a long time ago. Right. And it's the same things that that's the same philosophy. And President Trump, when he moved the embassy, didn't get anything in exchange. He sided with Israel and Likud, the conservative government, on a lot of issues. The exact opposite of Netanyahu and Obama, who wanted the 2-state solution and pushed Netanyahu in that direction. It's one of the reasons the two clashed a lot.
Jonathan, I'd like to, I hate to interrupt you. This conversation is going so well. And as I think I mentioned earlier, I was pretty sure this was going to be a 2-part show. And you lived up to all of my highest expectations. It is a 2-part show. I want to continue on your dissertation, which I'm finding fascinating, and letting people know. Everybody read about the heinous attack and sneak attack by Hamas. But your background and historical of the issues between the Arab nations, the Palestinians on the West Bank, as well as some of the terrorist organizations that Israel's confronted with. We know we have Hezbollah to your northern border. Well, the attack occurred, though, from Hamas from the Gaza Strip. So we'll continue on this with part 2 of this show. So we'll take a break now and end part 1. Thanks, Jonathan.
And thanks for having me on.